Without that, you would have either a kind of a collective indigenous situation where you would have one pharaoh that would be dictating everything, and everybody following orders and following external, but they would be not, it would not be, the system would not be able to develop itself from within at every individual level, you see. um, so this is to put, and what would happen, where would we end up if we were to complete the project via work on the shadow and then the self, and then connecting to the collective unconscious, which would be this collectivism again, but on an individual basis, is that you would have, as it were, the graduate, we would go from being, as it were, a creature in the garden to being creator. Together we would be able to become aware that we have this creator consciousness, this creator, this ability to create. And this is where we're at now. And you see it in all of the whole thing of the law of attraction and the secret and all of that, and that we are able to create, and that the whole problem of the observation problem and all of that is all that we are making our first steps to become creators, sovereign creators.
Yeah, but there are like a lot of bumps in the road, so it's actually a very narrow road.
You see, look, Jung spent time with the Hopi Indians, and he could he was very, they could really connect, because they were these Hopi Indians lived in a myth. They were like their direct experience was that they were living in a myth. You see, and the myth was like what connected everybody in a greater whole.
Right.
Like that would be like the collective unconscious, and with and we now the
Yeah, it's hard to get that if everybody is an ego.
That's it. But so much of this movement to say that, okay, the ego is the evil, and it's true, all of the badness comes down to the ego. But to go back to the social collectivism, where they would say all noses in one direction, would be basically revisiting a collectivistic kind of a dictatorship, because it would be like violating all individual rights. The whole idea of all noses in one direction is actually a way of saying, it's a way of saying everybody has to do what some central point does.
Yeah,
But
that's what you call singularity.
right, which is the false rapture.
Yeah.
But if we were to move on beyond the ego in terms of completing the experiment,
Yeah.
we would also return to like a myth, a collective myth, where everybody would be like able to focus and become one vision. But the difference would be that everybody would be carrying that myth as it were the creator of the myth, and not like one central point dictating to the whole what the myth is, what the collective is. So we would all become this collective consciousness as in terms of a creator.
But based on a self-aware individual.
Exactly, and as a self-aware collective. And you see, this is where Jung, when he wrote the book Answer to Job, and Jung was working very intimately with a Catholic priest, Father White, and they used to collaborate. And until Jung actually wrote Answer to Job, in which he basically made an analysis of Yahweh. And what Jung said is that Yahweh, in his rant on Job, basically what we learned there is that Yahweh was unconscious of his own shadow, and that was like an earthquake for the Vatican and for the Catholics, the Christian Church, because who are you to be saying that God is unconscious? That's where he broke with Father White. And the point is that what Jung realized is that what is happening is somehow at some level that this collective unconscious, which should be like a whole, a divinity, would have entered creation and started to evolve towards a new stage. So can you imagine someone saying that God is evolving? That would be completely in conflict with. But we would then be, as it were, that collective unconscious, which we would have communicated with and projected as Yahweh, if you wish. And then Jung said that Jesus was like the answer to Job, meaning that God would have entered her own creation, because God would not have been aware of creation in terms of a creature, but as God, as this whole omnipotent wholeness. You see, and this is the myth. This is the true myth. What Jung found is because, so at entering creation, what really entered there was this self-consciousness, this consciousness entering his or her own creation to get to become aware of him or herself. You see? And this is why what we're finding now at the end of the cycle is that we are actually we are creating this whole experience.
Yeah.
So we are like the creator that has entered creation, and now is like a creator having forgotten that he or she is a creator in his or her own creation, and because there's no self-consciousness yet. But you see that at an individual level. You see people that are walking around in their own creations. You see someone that says that blaming someone of not treating them as special, not realizing that they are the ones that are creating that. So this stage of self-awareness is actually becoming, almost you could say, like the creator becoming aware that he or she is the creator of his own reality. And that would mean that, as it were, as weird as this sounds, that God would have become aware, self-conscious. And in the beginning you would have this, understand, self-consciousness would be like a human thing. God would be, like Jung said, something so incredibly whole and powerful that God could never understand what human being was. You know what I mean? It's like a human and an ant. But so the whole point would be then that God would have entered creation to become aware of him or herself, and we would be then actually little sparks of that flame. And that's the way we would be like returning to this God source, as pieces of this God source, but now self-conscious. The idea is not to go too deeply into that part, but the idea is to sketch the whole cycle and to see that that what is now happening is and what we call in Blissing Out is that we are trying to go from the ego to the self, which would be like skipping the cross or the shadow and aborting the whole mission of the what this cycle is called the Euroboric cycle, aborting the mission of the self, of the individual. So the self with a capital S, you could call it the real individual. The next step is the ego becoming, as it were, civilized or reconnecting to the deeper core, which is at the same time individual and collective, which is like the fractal. So then you need to see that we're all little fractals. It is not that we're fragments. We're all little fractals of the whole flame, fire, which is God. And each of us is like a little flame. So we're like, it's not like we're particles. And each of us is awakening to the fact that we are, the self is divine.
Okay, so the problem is the shadow.
Yeah.
That's where we're stuck. meaning. Like today I read a very interesting article, and this professor emeritus came to the conclusion that after 40 years of studying in child psychology, he realized, it's an article called Ritalin Gone Wrong, and he realizes that everything is based on experience. It's not that these people with ADD are born with some brain dysfunction or their brain is different. Yes, the brain is different, he says, but it's different because of experiences that you have gone through during your childhood. And a lot of it he attributes to not being able to self-regulate as from a little child, because like he said, one of a disruptive behavior would be that you would take a baby and just scare it, or just take it from one situation to the next and let the child or baby feel totally like not in control, or just like actually a kind of a shock trauma, and that changes the brain, and that just builds on that to create these disorders.
And what he's saying is that it's all based on these original trauma of a child in the and that leads, and that's the shadow. You see, it's these traumatic experiences that lead to disorders. And the whole idea of the cross, or what we call Jungian, the shadow work, is that only by revisiting the crime site, these traumas, going back to these parts in our life where we were wounded, that the remembering occurs, the healing